Hello, welcome to Learn Academy. In this tutorial video, we will be looking at mastering the art of writing a final year project report. So let's get started. What is a final year project report? A final year project report is a comprehensive document that summarizes the research, findings, and outcomes of a student final year project. This project is typically submitted by students at the end of their final year of study, either in the university or college, and of course is a requirement for graduation. So let's look at what the report entails. One, we have the title page, followed by the acknowledgement, certification, list of figures and tables, nomenclature, abstracts, table of contents, introduction, literature review, methodology, results, discussion, conclusion, references, and appendices. In this section, we're going to be looking at what is a title page. A title page is the first page of a final year project report and typically contains the following: the title of the report, then we have the student name, we have the name of the academic institution, then we have the department, we have the program name, and the date of submission. So in this page, we have a sample of the final year report title page. You can see we have a final year research project. You can see the details. We have the title of the report. Then, of course, we have the academic institution. You can see the academic institution. Then, of course, we have the name of the student written down here. Then we have, of course, the program, the program, if it's a Bachelor of Engineering or if it's a Bachelor of Science or other degrees, awarded degrees. Then we have the program name, which is Chemical Engineering, for in this particular example that we are using. Then, of course, we have the project report date. In this case, we have October. Then we have the year. So this is a sample of a title page, a final year project title page. So let's look at the next one, which is an acknowledgement page. So what is an acknowledgement page? The acknowledgement page is a section in a final year project report where the author expresses appreciation and gratitude towards individuals, organizations, or institutions that have provided support, guidance, or assistance during the course of the project. So let's look at an example of the acknowledgement page. So this is like a sample of how an acknowledgement page looks like. For example, if you look at this sample, we have: I would like to express my deep gratitude to my project advisor, Professor John Smith, for his guidance and support throughout the project. His expertise and encouragement were invaluable in helping me to navigate the challenges of the research. I would also like to thank the technical staff in the Chemical Engineering Department for their assistance with the experimental work, and my lab mates for their camaraderie and helpful discussions. Finally, I would like to thank, you can see, so this is how an acknowledgement is written. So that's what an acknowledgement is. So what is a certification page? A certification page, also known as attestation page or signature page in some institutions, is a document that satisfies the authenticity and accuracy of the final year project report. It's also a separate page, on your project report. So let's look at a sample of a certification page. It's going to be a different page, on a different sheet, your report. So the headings will be certification. Then there's going to be written as this. This is more like a generic template. It could be different, depending on the academic institutions that you belong to, or even in some cases, some departments have some form of template or the other. But generally speaking, this is how a certification page is laid out. So look at this. We certify that we reviewed and approved the final year project report submitted by, so your name will be here, entitled, that is, you insert the title of the project here, impartial fulfillment of the requirement for the degree, or you insert the degree name here in chemical engineering. If yours is business, you have to put business studies or business administration, computer science, or otherwise. Then you insert the institution name there, then your supervisor, the department head, then of course the date. So let's look at the list of figures, the next one, which is the list of figures and tables. So what is the list of figures and tables? The list of figures and tables is a section in a final year project report that provides a list of all the figures and tables in the report, along with their corresponding page numbers. The purpose of this section is to help reader navigate the report and locate figures and tables of interest. So how do you lay it out? So it's also going to be on a separate sheet. So you have a list of figures first. Then, peradventure you have different figures you must have used in any of the body of the report. So you have figure 1, then you correspond it with the page number where that figures can be seen. Then you have figure 2, the page number is 8. Figure 3, the page number is 12. After the figure, of course you have to put the title of the figure there. Then you could have as many figures as you have contained in your project report. Then you also have the list of tables. So list of tables, we have table 1. So the table is physical and chemical properties of the reactant. Where can this table 1 be seen? Page 3. So you can see the page number there, 3. Then table 2, experimental data for heat transfer, can be seen on page 7, and like that, etc. You have it like that. Let's look at the next one, which is the nomenclature page. What is a nomenclature page? The nomenclature is a section that includes list of symbols and abbreviations used in the report along with their definitions. Let's look at a sample of a nomenclature page. Of course, this nomenclature page will also be in a separate page, on a separate sheet, on a separate sheet. So the heading usually will display nomenclature. So you can see, for example, we have the symbol, then we define the symbol definition. So we have the symbol role, which is defined as density. Then of course I could have the unit inserted into a bracket. You have the CP, you have the K. So what does K means is thermal conductivity. This U means velocity. So it's kind of based on what your department or your program is. So it depends on that. And in some cases, some is not compulsory for you to have nomenclature. Some report don't show the nomenclature. It all depends on specifics. It depends on your supervisor, your department, or your academic institution. So let's look at the next section, which is abstract. So what is an abstract? The abstract is a concise summary of the main point of a final year project report. Of course, it's typically placed after the title page. Typically placed after the title page before the main body of the report. And it provides a brief overview of the project objective, methodology, results, and conclusion. So let's look at generic sample of an abstract. And just as stated before, an abstract also have to be on a separate page, on a separate page. So look at this sample abstract. The aim of this project was to investigate the use of, so you insert whatever you want to insert. This is more like an experimental project. So for those in other faculties, yours might not be laid out as it is here, but you can of course adapt this method to draft your abstract. The aim of this project was to investigate the use of, then you insert project for the, you insert the application or the purpose. The project involved a literature review, experimental work, and data analysis with the goal of optimizing the temperature, or optimizing the yield, or any other thing or parameter you might be considering. So this is how the abstract is laid out. So you kind of make it concise, make it clear, concise, and of course should be within 250 to 300 words in length. Next section we'll be looking at is the table of contents. So the table of contents is a section in a final year project report that lists all the main sections and subsections of the report along with their corresponding page numbers. So this is a sample template of how a table of contents is laid out. You could have the list of figures, list of tables, then you have their corresponding page numbers. You have the abstract page number, the introduction, then you have the page number, the literature review, you have the page number, and you lay out all the different sections of the report, with their corresponding page number. Let's look at the next section, introduction. The introduction is a section of a final year project report that provides an overview of the project and its objective. The purpose of the introduction is to provide the reader with a clear understanding of what the project is about and why it was undertaken. However, under introduction we have subsections which you need to really understand. We have common subsections that are often included in the introduction. One of it is background. We call it background. This subsection provides some context and background information on the topic being studied. Of course, it may include, a literature review or a brief history of the field. So let's look at what an example of a background section looks like. Look at this background section example. The production and purification of pharmaceutical is an important area of research in chemical engineering. So I want to believe this title of a project should be production and purification of pharmaceuticals, for example. So if you look at the background, it sort of gives a background to pharmaceutical drugs, and the necessity of the purification, the effect, and the like. So it's a background. You give a background of what your project topic is. So you can look at this background template and try to understand how you can adapt these to your own specific project title. So the next subsection under introduction is problem statement. Problem statement. This subsection states the problem or research questions that the project aims to address. It may describe the motivation for the project and why the problem is important. So let's look at an example of a problem statement for a final year project report. You look at this problem statement example. Look at the production of hydrogen fuel from renewable sources is an important goal for sustainable energy production. However, current methods for hydrogen production, such as steam reforming and electrolysis, are expensive and require significant energy input. In addition, the storage and transportation. So if you look at this, you will look at we are stating the problem statement for our project report. So the next subsection of introduction is objective. This subsection lists the specific objectives or goals of the project. It may describe the expected outcomes and the impact of the project aims to have. So this is an example of objective, the objective under the introduction. You can see under this we have the project aims to achieve the following objective. Number one, characterize the chemical composition and properties of the raw materials for use in ethanol production. Two, optimize. You can see I'm listing out all the objectives. So the next subsection under introduction is scope. We call it scope. This subsection defines the scope of the project and outlines what is and is not included in the project. For example, look at an example of scope. This project aims to investigate the feasibility of using microalgae as a source of biodiesel fuel. The project will focus on the strength. So you're trying to get the scope of this project. You're trying to lay out the scope, that is the limit and the boundary where your research will be. That is scope. So methodology, let's look at methodology. This subsection describes the methods or approaches used to carry out the project. It may include details on the experimental design, the data collection analysis, or even any software or equipment you might have used to carry out that project. So you can see this is also an example of methodology. This is an example of methodology. Still under example of that methodology that is captured under the subsection of introduction. So the next one under introduction is significance. Significance. This subsection describes the significance of the project and how it contributes to the field you are in question. For example, we might be looking at chemical engineering. So it discusses the potential implications of the project and how it may impact society. So this is also an example of significance. Is an example of significance. Now in this section, we'll be looking at literature review. So what is literature review? The literature review is a critical section of a final year project report that provides an overview of existing research and knowledge in the field. The literature review purpose is actually to identify and evaluate the current state of knowledge on the topic being studied and to situate the project within the broader context. So let's look at the segment of literature review. Before you can start putting up your literature review, you need to understand that there are different segments that encapsulate the literature review. So one of it is introduction. So you start with a brief introduction to the topic you are researching and provide some context for why it is important. 2, you have the background. Background. You provide a general overview of the literature that has been published on the topic, including key concepts and theories. 3, methodology. You describe the methods you use to conduct your literature review, such as the databases you searched, the keywords you used, and any inclusion or exclusion criteria you applied. 4, you have the results. You summarize the findings of the studies you reviewed, that is, those other literature you reviewed, highlighting key themes and trends. Next, under the literature review, you have the discussion. You interpret the result of your review and provide your own analysis and insights. The next one is the conclusion. So, you must have consulted different research materials and the likes. Then the next one is the conclusion. You sum up the main points of your literature review and emphasize its contribution to the broader field of study. What is methodology? Let's look at the next one. What is methodology? That is, the methodology typically refers to the specific approach or methods used to collect, analyze, and interpret data or information in order to address the research questions or objective of the report. Typically the methodology falls under, some institutions use chapter 3. They tell you it's chapter 3. It all depends on your academic institution. So let's look at an example of methodology. A methodology can come in form of a survey. That is, a survey methodology involves collecting data through a structured questionnaire or survey instrument. The data can then be analyzed using statistical software to identify trends and patterns. So a case study also, methodology involves in-depth analysis of a single case or example, which could be an organization, event, or phenomenon. So data is often collected through interviews, observation, and analysis of relevant documents. For example, a final year report on the impact, if you have a final year report on the impact of social media on political campaigns, you might use a case study approach to analyze the social media strategy and tactics of a particular candidate. Then we also have this type of methodology called content analysis. A content analysis methodology involves analyzing texts such as articles, speeches, or social media posts to identify themes or patterns. For example, a final year report on media coverage of a particular event might use content analysis to analyze the language, tone, and framing of new articles. Then finally, we have the one we call experimental methodology. An experimental methodology involves manipulating variables to test hypotheses or determine cause and effect relationship. For example, a final year report on the effectiveness of a new teaching method might use an experimental approach to compare the performance of students who received the new method with those who received a traditional method. So let's look at sections you need to actually include in your experimental methodology chapter. So we have one called experimental design. 1. You describe the overall experimental design and layout. 2. Explain the independent and dependent variables. 3. Discuss the selection and rationale of control groups or experimental conditions. Maybe, for example, if we have a factorial design with two independent variables, temperature and cooling rate was employed to evaluate the mechanical properties of the steel rod. So this is kind of how you laid out the experimental design. You describe the overall experimental design and layout. Then we have materials and equipment. Materials and equipment. You list and describe the materials, substances, specimens used in the experiment. Then of course you could provide details of the equipment, instruments, and every other apparatus that you use, including their sources, specification, or modifications as the case may be. For example, the steel rod used in this experiment were grade 316 stainless steel with a diameter of 10 mm and a length of 100 mm. The tensile testing machine, the model is in bracket, was employed to apply axial loads and record the corresponding forces. So this is an example of how you laid out the materials and equipment. You could also have it in tabular format, where you list out all the equipment, their models, and their functions. Then you have the next section under the methodology, the experimental procedures. Under this, you explain the step-by-step procedures followed in conducting the experiment. You also include details about sample preparation, data collection, and measurements. And finally, you outline any specific protocols or standards you might have followed. For example, the steel rods were initially cleaned and polished to remove any surface contaminant. Each rod was then inserted into the grooves of the tensile testing machine and subjected to a constant displacement rate of 1 mm per minute until failure occurred. The applied load and deformation were continuously recorded using a data acquisition system. So you can see how the procedure was stated, in a reporting tense. Then you have the next subsection under methodology, data analysis. Here you describe the statistical or analytical method used to analyze the experimental data. You explain any calculations, models, or software utilized. You also present any assumptions or limitations associated with the data analysis. Also, for example, the tensile strength and elongation values obtained from the experiment were analyzed using analysis of variance to determine the significant effects of temperature and cooling rates. Tukey's post-hoc test was performed for pairwise comparison and a significant level of 0.05 was adopted. You can see how that is laid out. Then we have at 5, quality control, still under methodology. Here you discuss any measures taken to ensure the reliability and repeatability of the experiment. You also could explain how sources of error were minimized or controlled, and also include details about calibration, validation, or reference standards used. For example, also, to ensure the accuracy of the measurement, the tensile testing machine was regularly calibrated using a certified load test. Additionally, a reference sample of steel with known mechanical properties was tested periodically to validate the performance of the system. So you could see how the measures taken was stated. Let's look at the next chapter, in your final year project report. What is results and discussion? The results and discussion chapter is an important section in a final year report because it presents the findings of your study or project and provides an in-depth analysis and interpretation of the results. The purpose of this section is actually to present the raw data or outcomes of your study without interpretation or discussion. It's usually presented using tables, graph, or visual aids to effectively communicate the findings. The results section should be organized in a logical manner following the research objective or hypothesis. In the discussion section, you interpret and explain the meaning of your results. Then you relate them to your research objectives and discuss their implications. These sections allow you to critically analyze your findings and compare them with existing literature or theoretical framework. Let's look at the next chapter in your final year project report called conclusion. So what is conclusion? The conclusion chapter of a final year report is the section where you summarize the main findings, discuss the implications of the study, and provide recommendations for future research and practical applications. So in this chapter, you have an opportunity to leave a lasting impression on the reader and highlight the significance of your work. So there are some elements that are commonly included in a conclusion chapter. One is summary of findings. Here you briefly recap the key findings and results of your research. 2. Discussion of implications. Under this, you just explain the broader implications of your research and how it contributes to existing knowledge in the field. Then the next one is limitations. You acknowledge any limitations or constraints of your study that may have impacted the results or generalizability of your project. The next one is recommendations for future research. Under this subheading, you suggest areas for future research to build upon your study and address any unanswered questions or limitations. Then the next one is the practical applications. Under this, you discuss how the findings of your study can be translated into practical applications or informed policy decisions. Let's look at the next chapter, which is references. So what is references? The references chapter in a final year report is an important section that provides a list of all the sources you have cited or consulted in your report. This section serves as a way to give credit to the authors whose work you have used and allows readers to locate and verify the information you have referenced. Then, of course, we have different formats and style for references, which vary depending on the citation style guide your supervisor give to you, or by your supervisor. E.g., we have the one we call the HAPA, we have the MLA, we have the Chicago, and we have quite a host of others depending on jurisdictions and countries. So here is an example of how a references chapter might look like using APA style. Using APA style, you can see book. This is how you reference a book you must have consulted or cited. This is how you cite a book. If it's a journal article, this is how you lead it out. For example, a book, you can see the author's name, the year of publications. You can see, the book title, which is The Art of Research, a comprehensive guide, then the publisher. Then journal article, if you are going to cite a journal article, you have the authors, you have the authors, the year of publications, the journal title, which is The Impact of Climate Change, the publication, the journal publication house, which is environmental science. You have the pages where the article reflected under the publications, and other information as the case may be. Then conference paper, you cite conference paper using this method if you are going to be using APA style format. So this is how you do, you cite conference paper. You also have the website. So you cite website as this if you are using APA style. Then thesis, for example, maybe you consult a doctoral dissertation. You can actually use this style, to reference a thesis. So that's basically what references is about. Let's look at the final one, which is appendices. So what is appendices? The appendices refers to additional supplementary material, that supports and enhances the main content of the report. You can include them at the end. Of course, they are included at the end of the document, and contain information that is relevant, but not essential to the main body of the report. So the content are usually included in appendices as follows. Under these appendices, you can have raw data. This include the raw data set or survey responses. You can include them under your appendices. Next one, you have the technical details, such as software codes, circle diagrams, algorithms, mathematical proofs. All of these can also be included under the appendices. Also, we have supporting documentation. If your project requires permissions, approvals, you could include all these approvals, under your appendices. We also have additional visuals. You could also include visuals that support your main findings or explanations. This can include charts, graphs, tables, or images that necessarily you don't want to include in the main body of the project. You can add them to your app. Thank you. Bye for now.